Hello and welcome back to my channel, and this is a review of the new Joseph Wright exhibition at the National Gallery in London. Now this is a very small exhibition, it's just one room, you can walk around it in about 10 or 15 minutes. But it's worth going along, I think. Now I've been interested in Joseph Wright for quite a long time. There were two things that drew me to Joseph Wright. The first is that he's from Derby. He's known as Joseph Wright of Derby. He's a local painter to me. I grew up in Nottinghamshire. I was fascinated by this idea that there was this great painter that came from Derby. That was the first thing that drew me to him. The second thing was when I first saw Experiment with an Air Pump at the National Gallery in London. And this is the main painting of this exhibition. And of course, this is on display in the National Gallery all the time for free anyway. So it's a bit of a con, building an exhibition around it. But nevertheless, it's a brilliant painting. A real masterpiece, I think. I think Wright's, crucial masterpiece. And what I liked about this painting was not just that it's brilliantly painted. It's a brilliant exercise in light and shadow, chiaroscuro and so on. But what it's about. It's a portrait of a scientific demonstration. From that time, when such things were starting to gain currency in intellectual circles and starting to gain the interest of the public because they were changing life, they were changing society. Here you've got the start of inventions, the start of the scientific world, which will lead to the Industrial Revolution. And it's the subject of a painting which is quite unusual. Not many people not many painters covered this kind of thing, even though it was an extremely important part of the change in society in the 1700s. And that kind of fascinated me about Joseph Wright. And I think in this painting he captures it quite brilliantly, right? So it's an exercise in light and shade. Wright decided to base a lot of his style on Caravaggio, the tenebrist approach to painting, where you've got one small source of light, and it's which is very bright, and sort of telescopes the action into that zone, and the rest of it is in shadow. And here the light comes from a table where an experiment is being performed, where a pigeon is being put into an air pump, right? And in the middle of the frame is the scientist. And what's interesting about the scientist is the way Wright portrays him. He seems to be wearing a dressing gown. He seems to be kind of like a mad uncle, right? And he's expressionless. He's totally impassive. He doesn't seem to have any emotional response to what he's doing. Is this Wright's comment on the cruel objectivity and coldness of science, right? So he seems almost like a sort of magician figure, like a Prospero figure, saying, da-da, look at what I'm doing. But there's no expression on his face. That's one of the haunting things about the painting, right? The expressions are on the faces of everybody else. And in so doing, what Wright, I think, is doing is giving us a cross-section of modern society's feelings about science. So if you look at the painting, there's a gentleman right in the foreground on our left. He's clearly very interested in it. Next to him is a boy who's fascinated. His face is lit up like a boy looking at fireworks. Above them are two patrons, a couple of Joseph Wright, who owned quite a lot of his paintings, who are looking at each other and sort of enjoying the sort of social moment. Then over on the right of the table, the two young girls, they find the experiment horrible. They're concerned about what's happening to the bird. And the father, we presume it's their father, is trying to, both console them and explain to them what's going on. But that in itself is an interesting response to science. The two figures on the far right are very interesting. We have a man sitting, brooding, almost as if he's thinking about the meaning of what he's seeing. Not the brilliance of it, not the brilliance of the science, not the way it's been done, or what it tells us about the physical universe, but its meaning as in, where is this taking us? And then behind him is an interesting figure, the boy. Now, I've never been able to quite work out what the boy is doing, whether he is raising the cage from which the bird has come, or he's opening the curtains to let in the moonlight. But he looks back at us almost with a sense of warning. With his expression, we're almost in cahoots with him, as if to say, what's going on here, what is this? So it's a brilliant panoply of responses to this new scientific world, this new scientific technology, and it's how it's coming into society. And I think this is Wright's masterpiece, and this is the one that made me really interested in his work. Now, in this exhibition, they've surrounded it with a few other paintings, which are interesting. I wouldn't say that they're great, but they're interesting and they show off his technique. The one that most impressed me was one that comes from a private collection. It was originally owned by that couple that you saw in the experiment with an air pump. Now, this painting is called Two Boys Fighting Over a Bladder. I don't know if this image that I've pulled off the internet can show you very clearly what's happening. It's a very dark painting with one very precise source of light. Now, it's two boys fighting over a bladder. A bladder was like a sort of, early football. It's a blown up bladder that you could play a game with like a ball. And what has happened, you can't really see it in this detail, but you can see it close up in the painting. They've knocked over a candle. So it's an extraordinarily original work because this whole moment is like a photograph. Before the invention of the camera, before the invention of movies, it's that split second while the candle is still lit before it goes out. And you can see that the light is coming through the bladder, which is under the boy's arm. So the boy with his back to us in the foreground, I don't know if you can see this, but he's got his arm around the ball and his body is twisted, almost in a C shape. It's an extraordinary twist of the spine. And he's got his finger up on the other boy's ear and he's twisting the ear. And the other boy is in quite pain. And we can see the red of his cheeks, the ruddiness caught in the candlelight. It's an extraordinary image of pain, of motion, of the movement of the torso of the boys. And because we can't see the candle, we can't exactly see what's going on, it almost has a sort of mythical feel about it. It's like these could be two cherubs fighting over, I don't know, some earth, heavenly pearl or something, or over the moon. It's a fantastic image. I can't quite get a good version of it online, but it's well worth trying to see it if you can. And that was a really striking image. The other most striking images, actually, in this particular exhibition are his mezzotints. Mezzotint was a particular approach where I don't quite understand. It was like engraved on a metal plate and it was black and white. Very precise, clear, almost metallic images. And Joseph Wright specialised in these, and they've got a series of them on a wall, and they're quite brilliant. I actually preferred them, in a way, to the paintings. Many of his paintings were based on the mezzotints. And you can see that it's almost like they're a reverse. That thing where, when you take a photo on a camera, and you can reverse the image. Wright's paintings are almost the reverse image of his mezzotints. And they've got the original mezzotint. I think the mezzotint is original, on the wall. And they're very beautiful black and white images, very evocative. There's one of a stable, just a stable at night with a horse in the doorway, which I think is very beautiful, very pure and very simple and very true. And I actually preferred them to the colour oil paintings because sometimes Wright has very unusual colouring. Sometimes his colouring is quite gaudy. So to get this sort of flesh in this firelight or candlelight, he puts on quite a lot of red, sometimes too much, I think. There's a very interesting painting in this collection of a young girl reading a letter by candlelight with an old man sort of eavesdropping over her shoulder. And he's put a bit too much rouge and a bit too much red on her arms. It's a bit gaudy. The old man is beautifully caught, but she looks too much. And also, the other problem that Wright has is, I sometimes think he gets his dimensions wrong. Right, there's one painting of a hermit in a cave, and the hermit looks like a giant compared to these two tiny men who are coming into the cave. It doesn't quite work. There's another painting, the first painting he exhibited, actually, which made his name at the Royal Academy, of three men, all of whom were from Derby. They were all gentlemen of Derby, looking at this sculpture of a naked, athlete from ancient Greece. And rather unfortunately, the way he's composed it, they all seem to be looking at the man's bits. But and the eye line and the way he's put the three men doesn't quite work for me. It looks a bit awkward. And so there's some problems which the Mezzotints, the simplicity of the Mezzotints, get over that, and I think they're more beautiful. They seem more regular. Another interesting painting in this group, I have always had an interest in the occult and in alchemy, and Joseph Wright was also interested in this as a sort of form of early science. So he has a portrait of an alchemist, looking for the philosopher's stone, a man, at night, with the moonlight coming in through the window, and he's got all his, his limbecs and his alchemical equipment around him. He's sort of kneeling there with two boys looking on. It's a very, very Caravaggio-esque arrangement in the frame. The people, the models, don't have the power that Caravaggio found in his models. Remember, Caravaggio used to take people off the street. These models just look like guys who've been dressed up in costumes. They don't have the same power. What I quite like about that painting, though, is I like the way that Wright both respects the alchemist as someone who was a learned person, who was an early scientist, and also slightly takes the mickey out of him, makes him seem rather a forlorn, vulnerable figure. So Wright is not a perfect painter. I would not say he's one of the great painters, but he's an interesting painter, an important painter, a very important painter, certainly in British art, because of the time he was painting and what he chose to portray, which was not common, in a world which was mostly made up of society portraits and landscapes. And that's why I think this exhibition is well worth your time. You go around it in about 15 minutes. It's very quick. It's a bit expensive for the price you have to pay, but I think it's worth it. Thanks very much.